Today we had one of the best days in the market in recent memory. The reason for this is because the US and China have cooled off on the high stakes game of tariffs and tariff negotiations. It does seem that some real progress has been made, and we're looking forward to more agreements. So the market responded in a super favorable way. So I want to look at some of the news and the financial calendar for the week coming up that may affect the market and tech in general. I also want to take a look at 4 different stocks. I want to look at SoFi, fintech bank, that had a really nice day and it moved to the upside. SoundHound, who we talked about last night on the channel, who had a 25% move today. D-Wave, QBTS, which cooled off a little bit, and Rigetti, which had a nice day but is selling off a little bit after hours because of missing on earnings. So we're going to talk about all of these things. We're going to do it as efficiently as possible. Let's jump right in. All right, so I have this article pulled up here from CNN, how Trump managed to get his much needed China trade victory. The unexpectedly dramatic de-escalation with China laid the groundwork for a growing series of trade negotiations that may produce a handful of rapid-fire, if less than fulsome, bilateral agreements to reduce U.S. trade deficits. We actually have a fresh start with China, said National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett in an interview with CNN. That's the way to think about these negotiations. Let's take a look at a Fox Business article. The Dow has officially exited correction. The NASDAQ is in a bull market on China-US trade progress. So we see that the Dow Jones was up 2.81% today. The NASDAQ was up 4.35%, and the S&P was up 3.26%. Congratulations if you're a shareholder and you saw gains in your portfolio today. It hasn't been the last easy couple of months, so this was great news, and the markets responded in a fantastic way. So I thought in this article, it was nice here. China agreed to the same stipulations, saying that it will adopt all necessary administrative measures to suspend or remove the non-tariff countermeasures taken against the United States since April 2nd. Under the deal, both countries would be reduced by 115%. The U.S. will temporarily lower its tariffs on Chinese goods from 145 to 30, and China will reduce its levies from 125 to 10. Another piece of news that I think is quite relevant for the wider tech market is this UAE visit that is coming up. So Trump is heading over to the UAE, and there's some rumor that shift that is likely to happen where US exports of advanced AI chips may be allowed to the UAE. Coming up tomorrow on the economic calendar, we have the core CPI, and this is going to be an important gauge of where the economy is and where the inflation is currently sitting. If we see a number which is widely expected or forecast at 2.4%, if we can come in below that number in a meaningful way, then that could make the Fed decision to cut rates a little bit easier. If the CPI is above expectations, then it would be a little bit less likely for us to get a rate cut, which is very favorable for banks, which is a perfect segue into SoFi, which is a bank we'll be covering, a fintech bank we'll be covering today. But before we do that, let's jump real quickly into our quantum watch list and Rigetti's earnings, because Rigetti reported after the bell today. So quantum as a theme, like many other stocks in the market, did pretty well today. Rigetti had a 9% day. Amazon had a huge 8% move. which is pretty massive for a company of that size. IonQ had a 5% day. And we actually saw that the only quantum ticker that was down was D-Wave, QBTS. Now we know last week, D-Wave shot up 60+% in just a couple trading days. So some pullback was expected and honestly healthy for the stock, but we'll go into that a little bit later. Let's look at Rigetti's earnings. Reported its Q1 results with revenues of 1.5 million and OPEX of 22.1 million. They've secured multiple contracts, including DARPA, AFOSR, and Innovate UK, strong cash position after a strategic investment from Quanta, a net income of 42.6 million in Q1 2025, and planned upgrade for their units. Negatives, they have a high operating loss of 21.6 million, a low revenue generation of only 1.5 million, a net income which is primarily driven by non-cash gains. Rigetti's Q1 2025 financials paint a complex picture. With 1.5 million in quarterly revenue against 22.1 million in OPEX, the company posted a substantial loss, operating loss, a figure that might concern investors. The most significant positive indicator is Rigetti's strong cash position of 209.1 million, recently bolstered to 237.7 million following Quanta's $35 million investment. So it wasn't a surprise to any of us that follow Rigetti closely or are looking at the stock and the future. Rigetti, this isn't the first time they've missed on earnings, and it probably won't be the last time. Even the CEO in a recent interview was very cautious to say we are in the research and development phase, and we're still years away from commercial value and runway. So take that for what you will. By the time the company is landing huge deals and making very powerful quantum computers and selling them commercially, the stock will also be a lot more expensive. So for early investors at this point in time, patience is really the name of the game. Let's take a look at Rigetti's price action today. And I have here the chart, and we really saw a lot of gaps up given the great news and the wider easing in the macro. And we saw Rigetti open at this $12 point. And Rigetti just kind of dropped around. We chopped around. So Rigetti opened, sold off a bit, and then broke through this 1150 and used this 1150 as a support. And then through the day, it also became a resistance. But it was just kind of hanging around this 1150 number going into earnings. As you can see, that this was a key level. And how I personally played this trade was I had 10 calls at the 1150 strike with a 517 expiration. And I scaled out of those. So today I sold 5 of those contracts and was able to basically get out of the trade, cover my cost basis. So being that in after hours, the stock has moved down with velocity, and it seems to want to be at this $10 place. It looks like those calls, the remaining calls, are, as the kids would say, cooked. But after the last earnings for Rigetti, where they missed, there was actually a bit of a rally after Rigetti earnings. So the stock can be a little bit unpredictable, and Rigetti can move with velocity. So I'm marking a rising support here and a potential bullish reversal. And it does look like in after hours, we've come down to essentially this rising support. I'm going to adjust this a little bit so we're connected there. So we could see Rigetti come down, and if it breaks down further, then we're going to need to look at other levels for Rigetti. And another key level for Rigetti would be the $7 level. And we've called that on the channel before a couple of times that Rigetti has been range bound between $7 and $10 for quite a while. So I'm personally not surprised to see Rigetti just kind of hanging around in this $7 to $10 area. Will it do something like what it did after earnings last time? If we want to measure the move, which was a miss, will it rally 61% after earnings? I don't know. The macro is favorable, so I guess anything can happen. What do you all think? Let me know in the comments below if you think Rigetti is going to trade up or down or all around. Let me know in the comments. All right, QBTS. So I was actually relieved today to see a little bit of cooling off in this stock that has been quite explosive. So we know that we are at this triple top that we've called out on this channel now a number of times. We see that we're also building a similar pattern, a top reject, consolidate, top reject, consolidate, top reject, consolidate. Now, what's the difference this time to the last time? Well, they had a really good quarterly. So the cooling off in this area happened really fast. And I actually think that if we had a poor macro today, that we would have seen a more aggressive sell-off, maybe down to this $9 level. But since the market was so good, people were kind of holding on to their position. I wouldn't count on that continuing to happen, but there's a couple different ways that this can go from this point. So Rigetti and their miss on earnings, if we go back to the quantum watch list and we look at extended hours, we can see how Rigetti earnings in the post market, they're getting crushed by 12%, but they're also pulling down the rest of the quantum theme as well, since they missed on Wall Street expectations. Now, does that manifest in our market trading session? Do we see sell-off and something like this tomorrow? Potentially. But we also are still kind of knocking on the door of this key 1192 level. So could we see some bouncing around in a base case? In a bull case, could we rip above 1192 and test the all-time high at 1328 and potentially move into price discovery? That would be the ultra bull case. And in a bear case, we just sell off. And again, I really do think there's enough price history here for this 937 level to be potentially a new area of support. And once again, I'm personally looking at anything above 937 as a potential opportunity to buy more D-Wave. All right, so now we're going to take a look at SoundHound. And last night on the channel, I actually pointed out that we had a bullish setup for SoundHound. They had a pretty good earnings, and I went over the financials. So if you missed the video last night, go take a look. But essentially, we had earnings, and there was a surprise, a 461% surprise. Year over year, revenue's gone up, and we actually saw some sell-off because we weren't out of the woods with macro. Now, recently, so SoundHound today actually had a 22.6% move. And if we go back, I made a comparison to QBTS and how QBTS was really a setup from a technical standpoint of bouncing off of the rising support. So, okay, so let's look at the 650 figure and let's just connect the bottoms here. So this is the rising support that I'm talking about. And when I made the call on this channel, I said, we're getting awfully close to this rising support. And I made a guess that SoundHound could bounce with velocity off that rising support. And what do you know? Today, we saw the move. And sometimes these growth stocks, they move quickly and with velocity. So we saw at one point that this stock had moved 25% to the upside. Now, when we zoom out, it's that we can see that SoundHound is no stranger to running and moving. And in our 2024 market, when the market was more bullish, we saw this massive run up. So the risk reward at this point, there still is a lot of runway for SoundHound to continue to run. Some key price levels that I would be looking at and maybe taking some profits at would be this 1188, where we can clearly see there's been 5 rejections. And then the next level would be about 1291, where we can see it's acted as a support and bounced a few times. And then really SoundHound can move with velocity. From late December until early January, we saw SoundHound trading in the high teens to mid 20s. So this stock, the growth story is intact. And this, to me, if we see another day of a candle like this, then I would be, for me to be convinced that this is a true bullish reversal, I would like to see SoundHound move through 1188 and 1260 and get back into at least this zone. And even if it needs to relax there for a little bit, maybe have a cold beverage, no problem. I would love to see SoundHound between 12 and 16. In a base case, we could see a rejection, maybe a rejection and just some sideways trading, which would follow the candlesticks over here. And in a bear case, we would see a rejection and just come back down to this rising support. Now, if we break this rising support in the future, then the trend is changing, and then we may be in for something more like this, which the trend would change and we'd be in a bearish reversal. So SoundHound is looking very promising. That's a beautiful candle there. Keep SoundHound on your radar. I think it's a great company. And I think that with their current financials, the growth story is certainly still intact for this small cap stock. All right, finally, SoFi, one of the best young banks in the stock market. I'm going to clear my drawings here. So SoFi, I've been interested for a long time in this $15 strike. I think that I'm going to make that actually a different color so it's easier to see. And the reason is because SoFi showed from November 2024 to February 2025, so 3 months of price history, that it liked hanging around this $15 level. And it was only in very challenging macro and lots of wider sell-off in the market that we plummeted all the way down to 9. So from a technical level, it's pretty clear at this point that we are in a reversal, and a very explosive reversal. We do know that this rally with SoFi started prior to the earnings and has been carried through the earnings, and really Wall Street has a tendency to reject SoFi as a bank and a business. And we've seen it now in the last couple earnings where there's a gap down. So I'm just showing the earnings and the gaps down, but the numbers don't lie. SoFi is a monster and growing quickly, growing their customer base. They're growing their portfolio, and the numbers keep looking better and better. So the growth story is intact. So now what are we looking at as the next level of significant resistance since we closed at 14? So we did reject once in April off of this 14. It seems that the next level of potential significant resistance would be 1478. But SoFi in a good macro and in a macro with rate cuts, really, I think I would actually be looking at this $18 level. If we cross into, so I want to give a base case. So in a base case in good macro, I see SoFi using $15 as a support going forward. A bear case, if macro shifts or there's some sort of black swan event, I see potentially a rejection on 1473 and a bearish reversal. And in an ultra bullish case, I'd love to see SoFi just wander up to its all-time highs, test, retest, and maybe move further. We haven't seen an $18 price point since IPO. The all-time highs are 28, 25. So let's look at the implied move there. If SoFi was to get back to its all-time high, that's a 227% move. Now, I'm an investor in SoFi, and I've held SoFi for a long time. And I will tell you that a 6% day is unusual for SoFi. SoFi is a bank stock, so it tends to move a little slower than other tech stocks that move with more velocity. But SoFi is at the point now where the price has been pushed down for a long time relative to the amount of money that it's making, the amount of money that it's earning. So I see a lot of potential in SoFi, especially if the macro stays clear. All right, so that video was a tiny bit longer than I wanted it to be, but I wanted to be thorough on all the stocks that I covered. We covered 4 stocks and the news, and we looked forward towards the week at other things that may affect quantum and some other small cap stocks that we cover. I hope you enjoyed this content. If you did, please consider leaving a like or subscribe. Good luck in the market.